if the Libertarian nominee for president polls at 15%, then the Libertarian candidate for president will be on the national debate stage with Obama, and I'm believing it's going to be Romney. Independents now are the largest segment of American politics. That's the opportunity that exists. If I'm on the national debate stage, if the Libertarian nominee for president is on the national debate stage, I think given today's political environment, anything is possible given that scenario. That aside, if the Libertarian candidate for president gets 5% of the general election vote, which has never happened before, but if that happens, then the Libertarian Party receives $90 million in federal matching funds for next cycle, next presidential election. That, I think, is a game changer.
It strikes me as you were a popular governor. You certainly had bold initiatives. I mean, you came in and you weren't afraid to use your veto power when necessary. You were a Republican.
State's 2-to-1 Democrat.
Right, and so why not capitalize on that and run as a Republican candidate, or when did the switch?
Well, I really think that that it's about the message. That the message that I'm delivering is really, for the most part, the same as Ron Paul's, and that communication 101. When you hear the same message from a couple of different sources, it resonates more. The fact that Ron Paul gets labeled as kooky, I don't happen to think anything he says is kooky, but if you can hear it from him, if you can hear it from me, and you're somebody who's really undecided or unsure about what's being said by Ron Paul, maybe you hear it from me too, and I get it. I happen to think that this is the fastest growing segment of American politics today, the whole libertarian movement. That's my opinion. That's the way I feel. So here was the issue with me with the running as a Republican. CNN set the stage for my being excluded from the debates. And what CNN did is they said that you had to be at 2% in A, B, and C poll. I wasn't an option in A, B, and C poll. That's a real catch-22. If you're not in the poll, how can you be in the debate if a specific poll has been said that here's where you have to be? CNN, I can't make this up. CNN 7 months ago includes me in their biweekly national poll. The first time they included me in their biweekly national poll. I was tied with Kane at that time, ahead of Santorum and ahead of Huntsman. That's the last time my name appeared in their national poll. They dropped my name after that, and when it appeared, we thought, wow, this is now a done deal. What I asked the Republican Party to do was I asked the Republican Party to stand up and say, look, if you're going to have a debate based on certain criteria, then you need to include Governor Johnson in the poll. Not include him in the debate, just include him in the poll. Otherwise, isn't the Republican Party being dictated to on who is or isn't on stage? And by the way, soon after that poll with CNN also, the networks dropped their listing of criteria. There no longer was a criteria issued for the debate. It was just invitation and exclusion. CNBC had two criteria for their first debate. One was be registered to run for President of the United States. The other was 4% in any national poll over the prior year. Well, I was 4% in a Gallup poll in May. Undeniable. CNN would not return our phone calls as to why I was being excluded from their debate. I got to tell you, that's manipulation of the process in a way that just goes completely undetected. So back to message. It is about the message, and this is a way. I don't think Ron Paul is going to be successful getting the nomination, and that's the end of the message. If someone like myself, and don't get me wrong, not that any Libertarian candidate wouldn't be delivering the same message, but look, in the sense of I'm just the messenger, It's always been about that, and it was that way when I ran for governor of New Mexico. Could you run? Could you talk about the things that were really wrong? Could you talk about the solutions that went along with it? Could you do that in the context of not getting bought off? And then could you actually govern that way? And I'll just tell you, you could. Good government was easy. It wasn't hard.
Wait, when is the convention for?
May 4th.
May 4th.
May 5th is the actual vote date.
Yeah. And is the Libertarian Party candidate on every ballot at this stage? Every state?
If the Libertarian Party comes up short on that goal, it may just be one state and the District of Columbia. So I think for the most part, yes. In the Libertarians' 40 years of existence, Libertarians have got on the ballot in all 50 states in 4 of those 40 years.
Ron Paul's not going to get the GOP nomination.
He's not, no.
But would he be a better candidate for the Libertarian Party, at least to get to that 5% to trigger those dollars?
Well, you could probably unquestionably argue that yes, he would, but logistically, it's not possible for him to do that. He is in the Republican Party nominating process. Libertarians nominate May 5th, and the Republicans have 2 months to go in their primary.
Right. But so, do you think is he more about Ron Paul than about the movement? If he's a stronger candidate as a libertarian to maybe hit that 5%, because he has scored far over that in several polls. Well, would that make sense for him to, again, to trigger those dollars and for the future of the party?
I wouldn't for 1 second tell Ron Paul what he should or shouldn't do, but he's not going to be the Libertarian nominee because he would have to virtually declare that tomorrow to make that happen. Same with his being able to be a third party, he would virtually have to be embarking on that now.
Right. And of course, there's always the rumors out there that really what he's doing is setting the stage for Rand Paul.
Sure. No, I think that's the case. Yeah, that it is a family business too, and that there's that part of it.
Yeah. One would think. So correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm one of those New England journalists, kind of guys. But coming from New Mexico, one would think that immigration probably is your strong suit. Or
I'd like to think I know something about it.
I would think so too.
And I think that I'm saying things differently than everybody else.
What is your position on immigration?
Well, that first of all, that immigration is really a good thing. Don't build a fence. What an incredible waste of money that would be. Make it as easy as possible for somebody who wants to come into this country to get a work visa. I'm not talking about a green card. I'm not talking about citizenship. That's comprehensive immigration reform, and that should also be something. I have thoughts concerning that, but just immigrants that want to come into this country and work, issue a work visa. For the 11 million that are here, I have really a good sense of what is represented by those 11 million, and it's really complex. You can't deport 11 million, and you shouldn't, and I would have no desire to do that. So you have to set up a grace period where you can document them. And then border violence, which is not to be discounted for our thoughts about the border. Border violence is prohibition related, and since '99 I've advocated legalizing marijuana, and I believe legalizing marijuana would dry up about 75% of the border violence. I think when the country legalizes marijuana, and I say when because just in October of last year, Gallup poll, 50% of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. The number is moving up, not down, and the reason is people are talking about it. It's an issue that the more it gets talked about, the better it gets understood, and clearly we're going to bring an end to the prohibition of marijuana. I think when we legalize marijuana, I think we take giant steps toward rational drug policy nationwide, which is just looking at the issue first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. We're getting the cream of the crop when it comes to workers from Mexico.
Yeah, let me get back to the immigration, because it surprises people sometimes that Connecticut has some controversy with this issue. Connecticut just recently passed its own version of a DREAM Act. Is that a good?
Yes, I think so. I think so.
You would support that?
Well, so is any piece of legislation right? Well, I'm in the camp that if it makes an improvement, you got my signature. If it makes an improvement.
New Haven is known as the safe haven, and the mayor of New Haven has declared the city a safe haven for illegal immigrants, and even issues municipal identification cards so that they can get city services. Is it unfortunate that local municipalities, local states like Arizona, have to take action on their own because the federal government won't act?
Well, so I argue that first of all, states should have the ability to deal with this in their own way. I would never have signed that piece of Arizona legislation. I have a hotel interest in Tempe, Arizona, and let me tell you, when they signed that legislation, here were the hotel, it's a very nice hotel, convention facilities, and nobody's holding a convention in Arizona anymore, and it's because of the immigration law. It is discriminatory, period. I don't care what anybody says. And I think it's a politically made-up issue. I think at the root of all evil are politicians that are going to save us from the terrorism. They're going to save us from Islam. They're going to save us from the illegal immigrant. They're going to save us from drugs. They're going to save us from dying on the street from health care. You name it, elect me, and that's what I'm going to provide.
Getting back to marijuana, we just recently, last year, decriminalized marijuana here in Connecticut to where now it's equivalent to getting a parking ticket. And now there's a proposal that's being debated in Hartford right now to legalize marijuana use for medical purposes. Are those the issues that... your position sounds a lot like the Green Party. The Green Party has long been in favor of simply legalizing marijuana and just getting it off the books completely.
The party that's been in favor of that from day one and can bear a responsibility for the fact that we're on the verge of legalizing it is the Libertarian Party. I mean, that's where the Libertarian Party came to my focus in the first place. This is the party that wants to legalize drugs. What's that all about? Well, just look at it for a little bit and realize that, wow, that makes a lot of sense. So libertarians really are at the core of that issue.
And I'm assuming you're a strong, again, libertarian position, strong supporter of the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I was in Phoenix 3 years ago, when the president was there. I was at a convention, and the president was the speaker. I stepped outside, and there were crowds, large crowds, one on each corner, for Obamacare, against Obamacare. And down the middle of the street came a guy wearing a gun and a holster and carrying a rifle over his shoulder. Because in Arizona, you can do that.
You can in New Mexico, too.
I thought you might be able to. It was quite the moment when you got these two crowds chanting, yelling, screaming at each other. You got the President of the United States inside the building, cops everywhere, Secret Service, and down comes this gentleman sporting his guns. And I'm sitting there, I'm not used to this. I'm just kind of standing there saying to myself, wow, this is crazy. I mean, this is not the environment. You really want to do something like this. Tell me where I'm wrong when I worry about something like that. Well, or is it just by nature because I'm not used to seeing that?
I guess you're just not used to seeing it. Is this a guy to fear? No. This is the guy that when the shooters come out and there are all sorts of the shooting atrocities, this is the guy that you want. This is the guy you want on the scene to bring an end to that.
How do you know when he's the guy doing the shooting? Which is, when the Congresswoman's event was shut up, in theory, he could have been that guy that Ray saw, or the guy doing the shooting. Well,
I'm in the camp that really believes that if you're going to outlaw guns, that those that are going to be left with guns are the criminals. I'm in that camp. I mean, that's nobody wants to hear that the how do you prevent a Columbine from ever happening again, Governor? When I was governor, you're not going to like my answer, but here's how, if you want to know how you absolutely prevent that from happening, how you absolutely prevent it from ever happening, you have a requirement that teachers have to have automatic weapons in their desks, and a qualification on how to use them. That's how you prevent it from ever happening again. And nobody wants to hear that, and it sounds a little kooky.
Now, granted, the individual that I'm referring to, I saw walking down the street. When the police came on out to him, and it was a very pleasant conversation. I was close enough to where I could actually hear it, where they kind of chuckled and said, "Okay, you made your point," and that's exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to make a point on this issue, and they asked him if he would, quietly just leave now, and had his picture taken by all the reporters who were out there snapping photos, and he did. He turned around and he left and just kind of like disappeared. There was no scene or anything. But I say it was just for someone who's not used to that. It was just a moment where you're holding your breath and you're saying, what happens now? Should I be running for cover or something like that?
Yeah, no, that's not the guy to run for cover.
Yeah.
That's not the guy you have to run for cover.
There was an article I read last month about, because you are an advocate of legalizing marijuana, that if every pot smoker donated $1 to your campaign, you'd be pretty flush.
Yeah, I'd have $100 million.
It's not coming.
You might be one of those contributors.
I'm probably not going to donate to you. I can
but
tell you
if you smoke marijuana, you might be one of those dollar contributors.
Yeah. Is that something you've been kind of focusing on?
No.
Or at least is a fundraising avenue?
No, they don't donate a buck. They don't.
Back on the issue of not just the issue of gun control. Every group, every organization, there is a certain element of extremism.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And I've been through my knowledge with Dan here. I've come across a few folks who are strong believers in the libertarian philosophy. Some of them will go to an extreme to the point where they'll advocate armed resistance against the government.
Well, the ability to have armed resistance against the government. I don't think anybody's advocating armed resistance against the government, but if the government is knocking down your door. I mean, if you take the most egregious drug case that's out there, and I'm not going to get this right, so I apologize, and you can't. But a California couple, pristine, thousands of acres. The DEA moves in with dozens of agents. They bust down the door to his house because the allegation was he was growing marijuana on his ranch, and he came out with a pistol, and they shot he and his wife dead. And to this day, the government still owns that property, although they've never found one leaf of marijuana growing on his property. Well. This is what libertarians would say, that you need to be able to protect yourself against that kind of behavior.
But there's an increase in private militias in this country, which, again, on the surface, that sounds alarming. It feels alarming. And if you advocate, positions like, we should have that ability, does that kind of like feed into that and create an environment where...
So first of all, I'll agree with you on the perception that it should create this fear or whatever, but the reality is anything but.
Really?
Right. And I'm basing this on my experience as governor of New Mexico. These militias are not in any way... there's nothing about them that's about gun violence. I mean, there's no gun violence associated with these militias. The fact that they arm themselves and that they go and have training on the weekend, I suppose it's the same as those that go and hunting is a hobby. I mean, guns are not my hobby, but I go out mountain biking with a group of 10 or 15 people, kind of the same thing. It's the 10 or 15 people that get together and they'll do target practice and they'll meet under the notion that they're the militia. Well, what's the practical impact of that? Nothing.
Again, there is. I can see the point that there is always going to be that radical element, that extreme.
Sure.
So, it's your contention then, from what you know, and you obviously know more of it than I do, that those occasions where we see the this extremist group with plans to shoot law enforcement officers or et cetera.
Well, don't get me wrong. I think that perception is an accurate perception, but I have never ever encountered a militia that or heard reports of plans to shoot law enforcement. No way.
Well, you see them on the news every now and then.
You do, and don't get me wrong, not that, but that is the fringe of the fringe, and we always have that. You take any topic, and we've got that.
But there's more than a fringe when, after President Obama, before he was inaugurated, there was a run on weapons and ammunition because they felt that their gun rights were going to be lessened in this administration, and it hasn't happened so far, and that's happening again. Local Walmarts running out of bullets.
Well, can you go off the record for the name that I'm about to mention, because I don't want to put him on the hook.
It's on video.
You're on video.
Oh, all right. Well, okay. So I met with a Wall Street icon, and I said to him, "So tell me, what do you think?" And this is somebody who's very elderly and a renowned name, and he said, people don't want to hear what I have to say, and this is his plush office in New York, and he said, what I'm telling people is that this country is going to collapse monetarily, and it's because we can't sustain what we're doing. So what I'm telling my friends is to get guns and ammunition and canned food, and if you have the resources, buy land near water, seeds, and if you can, gold and silver. Not that gold and silver will work in a collapse, but maybe you have a chance of it working. So this phenomenon of buying up guns, I bought my first gun in my entire life. I bought my first gun a couple of years ago. It doesn't have, it has to do with this notion that, same as this Wall Street icon, who was about as far removed from those statements looking at him as you would think that he could be.
If the government is going to collapse, how does President Johnson keep that from happening?
That I am promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013, and that's how you prevent it. And that's what this gentleman would have said. Clearly, I'm saying to him, well, you know that I'm advocating balancing the budget as the solution to this. He goes, and that would do it, but they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. People are not going to accept that, and politicians are not going to go along with that, and what is going to transpire is unavoidable.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about issues that are important to the fine folks here in Connecticut. Submarines. I'm guessing you don't have many of those in New Mexico.
Well, we have the USS Albuquerque and Rolls-Royce keys for any submarine captain that can sail the USS Albuquerque into Albuquerque, coming in on the Rio Grande. I'm just going to say.
But
no, we don't.
Yeah, we don't. But this is submarine. This is the world center here. We build them. We teach people to drive them, and then we house them here as well. There's calls right now by the Obama administration for 2 rounds of BRAC, and every single time they've had a BRAC in the last 20 years, this base here has been on the list targeted. In fact, in 2005, the last BRAC, it was targeted for complete closure. They're also calling for delaying the construction of 2 submarines a year, which means this submarine fleet will decline, which is already a problem because we're not up to where a lot of the Navy submariners believe the fleet level should be. What's your position on defense and, to the best of your whatever you've studied it, the submarine fleet and the importance of it?
Well, so in my balanced budget for 2013 is a 43% reduction in military spending. What is a 43% reduction in military spending? Well, that's nuclear warheads from 2,300. By the way, and that's in the context of the biggest threat to our national security is the fact that we are bankrupt. So 43% reduction in military spending. It's nuclear warheads from 2,300. And I'm not operating in a vacuum here. These are some really intelligent people that do this for a living and sitting down and talking about this. But nuclear warheads from 2,300 to 500. It's the military footprint on the planet. It's all the bases that we have. It's the troops that we have on the ground in Europe and Japan and South Korea. It's research and development. It's intelligence. It's the military in uniform and the civilian staff that goes along with that, and it's the conflicts that we're currently engaged in, which I would extricate ourselves from immediately. That said, it's also my understanding, and I'm not pandering here to you, but it's my understanding when it comes to the Navy that submarines are really the untouchable naval force that we have. That aircraft carriers are, for the most part, somewhat, if not completely, outmolded. That we can fly anywhere on the planet, given our refueling capabilities, and fly back to the United States. Do we need, I think we have 14 aircraft carriers. Do we need 14 aircraft carriers? And when it comes to being able to launch missiles, the really most undetectable, reliable way to do that is submarines.
Getting back to your nuclear warheads, the Trident submarine, which we commonly joke to around this area, is that when it leaves port, it becomes the third most dangerous nation in the world, or powerful nation in the world, given the nuclear warheads that it carries. There hasn't been, those subs are aging quickly. They're going to be decommissioned over the next several years, and we haven't had a contract for redesign until just recently. Would your military budget cuts cut into that and eliminate the Tridents?
I don't know. I don't have a sense of that. But this is a mutual sacrifice deal. I mean, 43% reduction in federal spending is obviously shared sacrifice.
There's always that, that great debate, and it is really more a debate than real issues. The Defense Department their budget should be about defense, not economic development. And that's the argument you're going to...
Yeah, nation building.
Yeah, I mean...
And it should be about defense, and so I advocate a strong national defense, the operative word being defense as opposed to offense, as opposed to economic development, nation building.
Well, one of the arguments that was used here in 2005 during the BRAC round was the synergy between the Groton submarine base and Electric Boat, the manufacturer of submarines, and the impact that it has, on this area and it became an economic issue of closing that Groton submarine base could result in EB leaving, and you're talking about $3 billion to Connecticut's economy, 30,000 jobs, et cetera. How do you balance that issue of you want a strong military, but you've got this military complex that you really don't want to be economic, jobs as well. You got to make these choices. Yeah,
sure. And when you talk about a 43% reduction in military spending, what year do we go back to see those spending levels? 2003. That wasn't the end of the planet.
You mentioned earlier, Israel. What's your position on Iran?
I don't think Iran poses a military threat, and the fact that we should be vigilant to what may be a military threat. But if we're going to bomb them tomorrow, if we're going to bomb their what we deem to be their nuclear development sites, then that's going to have to be kind of a planned deal every couple of years, because I think that they'll just dig deeper and research will happen at a lower level. Point being is, I think if we bomb them tomorrow, that there'll be more of a resolve on their part to develop nuclear weapons than not, and that we should really be pursuing diplomatic ties to end that. So as much as the Obama administration says that they're engaged diplomatically, I think that they're really not engaged as much diplomatically as they might be, and that we should open up trade with Iran, and that these are the real live solutions to not having Iran as a potential military threat. Goes without saying, Iran is an unintended consequence of taking out Iraq. Iran's only concern every single day was waking up to what Saddam Hussein in Iraq was going to do to us today. We take out Iraq. Well, that's why we're dealing with this today.
If Israel decided to act independently, your position under your administration would be to embrace that, to walk away from it, or what?
Well, based on what I know today, I would be actively engaged with Israel to not, based on what I know, to not do that. That is not in the world's best interests, and that I don't want to take away from being vigilant. I was on. I think the analogies to Iraq are very similar. In 2003, I was on record. Let's not go into Iraq. I know there's talk of weapons of mass destruction, but we have the military surveillance capability to see them roll out those weapons of mass destruction. And if we do that, we can deal with this militarily, surgically. I thought that if we went into Iraq, we were going to find ourselves in a civil war to which there would be no end. Contrary to that, Afghanistan, I thought initially, was totally warranted. We were attacked, we attacked back. I argue that after 6 months, we wiped out al-Qaeda. That was 11 years ago. We should have gotten out of Afghanistan 11 years ago.
How do you fight the war on terror? How would your administration engage in the war on terror?
Well, that there genuinely is that threat, and we should be vigilant to that threat. When I talk about a 43% reduction in military spending, I'm opposed to foreign aid. The fact that we would borrow and print money to the tune of 43 cents out of every dollar and then turn around and give it away, I think that's crazy. But I would distinguish between foreign aid and military alliances, believing that the key to us being able to reduce our military expenditures by 43% is to have other countries take up the slack that they haven't since World War II.
What would your relationship with Pakistan be?
That we be vigilant, again, to what is happening in Pakistan, but it doesn't seem to me that given all the money that we've given Pakistan, that there's that we should be experiencing this kind of threat, if you will, or non-cooperation, if you will, and that it seems that the continued cooperation that we might have with them is somehow dependent on how much money we give.
Do you think that the Obama administration's strategy of using the unmanned drones to attack over the Pakistani border is a good call, given the circumstances?
I don't want to misspeak. Certainly, in circumstances, you would think that is the way to do it. That's using your brains, but that's doing it in an intelligent way. It's achieving the objectives. But when you look at our drone strikes in Somalia, where we go and we strike a terrorist stronghold, that we're not just hitting this terrorist stronghold. We're wiping out a half a city block. And how many enemies are we? How many hundreds of thousands of enemies are we making for life, if not millions of enemies? New enemies are we making for life, as opposed to the perhaps half a dozen that we've killed.
Bring it back to the domestic issues. The Republican primary battle that's going on right now has shifted, or at least obviously no one's declared the economy should be the top priority, but it's shifted to much more of that debate now being on social issues. What's your take of all these social issues that seem to be dominating the presidential election at the moment? I think
the world vilifies Republicans for their focus on social issues. For someone who has a social conservative agenda, great, terrific. Lead your life by example. That's how you're going to affect others. But in my opinion, when you make that public policy, you end up criminalizing individuals that would not have otherwise been criminalized.
Have Republicans declared war on women?
Yes, they have.
What would you do differently?
Well, I fundamentally support a woman's right to choose. I fundamentally and have always supported that. The issue being, government shouldn't be making decisions in your and my life. Fundamentally, these are our decisions.
the Supreme Court's taking up Obamacare today, and the focus is the individual mandate. What do you think of, first of all, the package of health care reform, generally speaking, and then secondly, this individual mandate? Because there is a logic behind the reason for it. You need to get the healthy people to sign into the insurance company so some of this becomes affordable.
Well, the whole healthcare issue in the first place, the solution to healthcare in this country really is free market approach to healthcare, and healthcare is about as far removed from free markets as they possibly can be. I've said this always to Republican groups. Look, everybody here is railing on President Obama's health care plan. It's unaffordable. I agree. It should be repealed. But come on. Republicans controlled, and I'm speaking now as a Republican when I was in the fray, and I speak on it today as a Libertarian running for president. But look, Republicans controlled both houses of Congress here just a few short years ago, and the presidency, and what did Republicans do? They passed a prescription health care benefit that wasn't affordable then. It's not affordable now. So point is I don't blame Obama, and I never have, for our current economic mess. It's both parties. It is both parties. I've always thought that Republicans were about the checkbook, always. I've always thought that the Democrats were the civil liberties. And I just think libertarians may be the best of both worlds.
If you go back with the healthcare as a free market approach, that way if I've got a pre-existing condition or I'm a high risk, I can't get that healthcare, or it becomes so becomes so expensive. Well, this kind of negates some of that.
Well, so that being an issue, yes, that was a real issue. So isn't that something that perhaps could have been addressed as opposed to what actually did transpire? I just think when it comes to free market, look, when you go down to get your oil change, you know that your oil change is going to cost somewhere in the vicinity of $50. But man, when it comes to an oil change, when it comes to an X-ray, you don't know what the X-ray is going to cost, and it comes back at $500, and you're not paying for it. So who cares? Well, if you did have to pay for your X-ray, I suggest to you, if the government were to blow the lid off of supply, require advertised pricing, that you would know that you could go somewhere and get the X-ray done for $50, and that's where you would go, and that all X-rays would be $50. They wouldn't be $500. You wouldn't go leave off your car and say, carte blanche, change my oil. You'd know that it was in the vicinity of $50. If it was $500, you'd have a fit, and you'd never take it there.
What if you couldn't afford the $50? Never mind the $500, but you couldn't afford the $50.
Well, I'm in the camp that believes, that there are those that are truly in need. And that government perhaps is the only provider that can achieve that. But that we've gone way over the line regarding those in need, and that has us in the situation that we're in. I mean, Medicaid and Medicare and military spending are the three big gorillas in the room, Medicare being the big gorilla in the room, that if we don't reform these three areas, if we don't reform Medicaid and Medicare, there won't be any health care. I mean, Russia experienced a monetary collapse. There is nothing to suggest that we're immune to the mathematics of continuing to print and borrow money in the context that we are from having that monetary collapse. We're 6 to 8 years away from being at 160% of debt to GDP, which is Greece. I mean, it's on paper. That's the mathematics.
So
it's pretty simple mathematics too.
Go ahead.
No, I'll continue.
So if government's getting out of the healthcare business, you'd like to see, you've proposed that government supply money to residents for parochial schools? Is that the government supplying that? Local government, state government, federal government?
For
vouchers to go to a private school?
Well, I proposed in New Mexico. I
Right.
proposed bringing competition to public education as a way to reform education. So I was more outspoken than any governor in the country regarding school choice. I proposed a full-blown voucher system in New Mexico for 6 straight years. It didn't happen, but I took on that debate and that discussion. So in this case, this was, in New Mexico's case, a voucher was going to be worth 2/3 the unit value of what it was to be in public education. And the voucher would have been redeemable in public education or in private education. And in this case, private education on average is less than 2/3 that of public school on average.
Would you eliminate the Department of Education?
Yes, in a heartbeat. And that from the standpoint that the Department of Education gives each state about 11 cents out of every school dollar that every state spends. But it's money that Connecticut sends to Washington in the first place. It comes back as printed money, borrowed money, money that Connecticut sent them. But it comes back with 16 cents worth of strings attached. What people don't understand is that it's a negative. It costs money to take federal money when it comes to education. If the federal government just gave education back to the states, 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice, I think that's exactly what you would see, and that you would see dramatic improvement. You'd see the competition among states. Which states were fabulously successful, that would get emulated. Which states had horrible failure, that would get avoided. As governor of New Mexico, I think the states that are going to show fabulous success are those that are going to bring competition to public education. But anyway, Department of Education established 1979. Look, this is not a new phenomenon, and if you take the $900 million that's being spent on the Department of Education and just eliminated it, we'd have better education in this country.
Back on entitlements for a second. Social Security.
Social Security. One of the things I'm advocating is the fair tax. Okay, throwing out all existing federal tax, income tax, corporate tax, tax withholding, and IRS. And if you haven't studied or if you haven't looked at the fair tax, just check it out. Fairtax.org. Consumption tax. I really think that that's the answer to number one, that it would be cost neutral over a very short amount of time. Number two, it's the answer when it comes to our exports, making them 23% more competitive. It's the answer to China. It's also the answer to jobs with a zero corporate tax rate environment. If the corporate sector doesn't create tens of millions of jobs, private sector, I don't know what it's going to take to make that happen. So no more withholding from Social Security. That would come out of the proceeds of the fair tax. The fair tax is also revenue neutral. So that said, Social Security is not a problem relative to Medicaid and Medicare. Very simply, it's a system that needs to take in more money than what it is paid out. It's paid in $3.5 trillion more than what they paid out, but there's no bank of $3.5 trillion. The federal government spent that. But Social Security, imminently savable system going forward. Yeah, we can absolutely make it work. Raise the retirement age as tweaks to Social Security. Change the escalator built into Social Security from the wage index to the inflation rate. And then I think that you should have an opt-in, opt-out provision too. I would opt out of Social Security if given the opportunity, but at least have a provision for opt-in, opt-out. But Social Security, really not an issue relative to Medicaid and Medicare.
One of the better reform proposals about Social Security that I've heard that strikes me as saying this has some merit, I think, is a provision where everybody that contributed to Social Security will get back how much they put in, and then at that point it becomes mean tested. Is that a good?
I think so. I think so. That a mean. Well, these are. I think implementing the fair tax, that the whole issue goes away. That the proceeds for Social Security would come out of the fair tax, and that it would be collected every single time you bought a Coke. every time you filled up your tank full of gasoline, every time you bought a pair of shoes.
What other departments would you consider getting rid of?
Well, the ones that I'm advocating currently, the Department of Education, Housing and Urban Development, Homeland Security. I just think Homeland Security is incredibly redundant.
You're in Connecticut, the home of Joe Lieberman, who basically is first of all, he's the chairman of Homeland Security, but it was his idea back right after 2001 that Bush eventually, signed on to create. Why, given the fact that you do admit that war on terror still exists out there, we have people who do wish to do us harm, why would we want to get rid of the Homeland Security?
Well, that we not necessarily get rid of the functions, but we do have FBI, we do have state and local law enforcement. I just think that everything that that Homeland Security is currently doing is redundant or couldn't have been rolled into different departments. When after 9/11, the federal government gives the state of New Mexico, I don't know how many dollars to establish the Department of Homeland Security in New Mexico. Well, my department secretary of public safety had the dual title of Homeland Security Director. We didn't add a single new personnel as a result of our Homeland Security mandate in New Mexico.
I won't disagree that there's been a lot of grants for fire departments that are now better equipped than most anything else.
Or police departments with boats.
I have a rental property in Albuquerque that is leased to the federal government, to the department, and this nothing political was connected with the building. Actually ended up getting leased by the Forest Service, but there was the caveat that we would like the building upgraded to refrigerated air from evaporative air. And that we can get Homeland Security funds to do that because now we'll be able to keep all the windows shut.
When you were governor, 2 terms. Right?
2 terms.
2 terms. What was your biggest failure?
I didn't have any. What
was your biggest success?
The fact that we took it on, every A through Z, we took it on. That it would, and I'll be the first to tell you where we weren't as successful in certain areas, but it wasn't due to lack of debate, discussion, advocacy. So that was my biggest success. It was issues first. Politics wasn't really even a consideration. That was a promise that I made, and. Otherwise, who's going to advocate on the part of school choice? When I did that, 30% of New Mexicans supported that notion, and the outcry was just, none of this stuff I did happened in a vacuum. But that's why I enjoyed the job, and that's why I thought I would enjoy it, and that people need to get elected and actually be leaders. That's what you're elected to do, and. So we took it on. It was the problems. First you looked at the issues, first you looked at what the real problems were, and then the solution always had a basis in best product, best service at the lowest price.
When you were in office, your legislature was...
2-to-1 Democrat.
2-to-1 Democrat.
2-to-1 Democrat.
How was your relationship?
The most contentious of any governor in the country because of all the bills that I vetoed. Arguably... this may be an embellishment, and I put it out there, and I'm sure you're not going to take the time. Nobody has taken the time. I may have vetoed more legislation than the other 49 governors in the country combined.
Actually, we did.
Your Wikipedia page claims that.
Well, and it may be an embellishment. Yeah. It may be, but I would love for it to come out that Johnson made the claim that 750 vetoes, and actually all the other governors combined had 1,300 vetoes. Well, okay, all right.
You're still first. Yeah.
And that didn't happen in a vacuum. The state's 2-to-1 Democrat. I veto legislation that tomorrow there are going to be dead people on the streets. The sun isn't going to come up. all chaos is going to reign.
Did you get overridden many times?
2 times.
Just 2?
2.
On what issues?
One was the dumbest issue I can possibly think of. It was government-mandated quotas for long-term health care beds in facilities. I mean, this is dumb. And they overrode that because it was a Republican bill. And by the way, of all those vetoes that I rendered, unofficially 750 vetoes. Unofficially, a third of the vetoes were Republican bills. Unofficially, 100 bills that I vetoed were bills where the vote in the legislature was 114-0, and I vetoed the bill, and it stood. The veto stood. So,
Go ahead.
well, so just back to none of this happened in a vacuum, and people got to cast their vote regarding the verdict. They reelected me by a bigger margin the second time than the first time. And the state was 2-1 Democrat. But I think what they saw was none of it was about politics.
Washington has a problem.
You think?
I think. How do you end the gridlock? How do you?
Well, you don't. I'm making 3 promises. I promise to submit a balanced budget to Congress. I promise to veto legislation where expenses exceed revenue. So I'm going to be vetoing everything. Are they going to override? Yeah, they're going to override. I would have been elected President of the United States promising those 2 things. So the wind's at my back. What are the American people shouting at Congress if I'm elected? Balance the budget. That's one thing they're shouting. I think they'd be shouting on the civil liberties side. I think they'd be shouting, we want drug reform. I think they'd be shouting, we want marriage equality. I think they'd be shouting, we want peace, not war. But I would take that mandate, and I'm going to argue, though, that spending would be lower with those 2 promises than any other scenario you could possibly come up with. And if getting along is the goal, well, then just fasten your seatbelt for more of the same.
Would it be unfair criticism to say that you would then maybe possibly be contributing to the gridlock by taking such hard draw lines in the sand positions?
Contributing to the gridlock, I think, is a good thing. Gridlock is not a bad thing. When government can't pass legislation, you know this. The majority of legislation that gets passed is legislation that fixes prior legislation. That's the majority of legislation that passes. I just was able to veto a whole bunch of legislation that was never going to happen.
Your position on gay marriage?
I support marriage equality.
43% cuts almost across the board on most things?
Well, I've mentioned some things that I would absolutely cut out. There are some areas where, no, there wouldn't be cuts. Veterans benefits is one of those areas. But, yeah, there's an obligation to veterans, and that just goes without saying, and I think everybody feels that way and should feel that way.
Okay. Does that create other problems?
Will it?
Money doesn't go to certain things. There's going to be more unemployment, or fewer vendors, making parts for military equipment, that type of thing.
Kind of like the criticism of what happens at the end of World War II, when we have 10 million servicemen and women coming back from abroad. I mean, that was going to be economic catastrophe. And of course, what we had is that we had the greatest period of prosperity, arguably, that we've ever seen. I think implementing the fair tax kind of reboots the American economy in a really big way also. So that's my third promise, is to advocate on the part of the fair tax.
Just to let you know, this morning it was announced that Norwich got about $2 million from HUD for some lead paint, removal. Just to let you.
It's hard convincing people to give money back.
Oh no, I got it. I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, this is mutual sacrifice. I really I really argue that if we don't fix this, we're going to find ourselves without a country.
Shared sacrifice is an interesting phrase around this part of the state. If you don't know that one yet, the governor wanted shared sacrifice when addressing his $3.6 billion. There's a lot of debate of who shared what in that regard there.
Yeah, for his budget cuts.
Yeah.
And down to his balanced budget. Right?
And his tax increase of $1.5 billion a year. But it had to be done. I mean, there's no question about it. Anything else?
Anything else that might have missed?
Well, man, you guys grilled me. What can I say?
Well, we like to invite folks on into.
Thank you for your time. Really, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
We'll put it up on the web.
Very thoughtful.
And let people come and listen to you instead of listening to us tell them about you.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Oh, beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.